A very good evening from Legacy IAS. Today we are going to study about the 5 most important topics that is related to environment and that has happened in the past week. Okay, so first is with respect to the climate change topic. Okay, we are talking about climate change and there are some global climate highlights that have come forward in 2025. Okay, it is with respect to the understanding of how warm the year was of 2025, and also we will understand that the goal of having the temperature rise limited to 1.5 degrees Celsius under the Paris Agreement, how it is getting breached in the recent years. Okay, so it is a data that is released by the Copernicus data, reveals 2025 as the third hottest year on record, making it a critical milestone in a global climate trend. So this is particularly important. Why? Because it is one of the years in which the warmth, that is the long period average of climate, has appeared to breach the levels, right? Now moving forward, 2025, that is named as the third warmest year on record. Okay, third warmest. So which one was the warmest year? The warmest year was in 2024. 2024 where 1.6 degrees Celsius. This was in 2024. Okay, so this was the warmest year in the recent records, and remember the threshold that we talked about under Paris Agreement was 1.5 degrees Celsius, right? With respect to 2023 we had 1.48 degrees Celsius. This was in 2023, right? And therefore it makes 1.47 degrees Celsius that has been recorded in 2025 as the third warmest year. Right, all of these are with respect to the comparison as compared to the pre-industrial emissions, right? It has also come to the notice that the past 11 years, they have been the 11 most warming years. Okay, 11 years have been the 11 warmest on record. Global temperatures ranging from 2023 to 25 averaged more than 1.5 degrees Celsius as compared to the pre-industrial levels, right? So this brings us to a point to understand that all of the conference of parties that we have had, all of the climatic debates that have been going on for 3 decades, what are they pointing at? Okay, what is the work done with respect to the adaptation plan? What is the with respect to the mitigation plan? What is done with respect to the climate finance, and what is done with respect to the technology transfer, right? Now moving forward, there is more data with respect to the regional temperatures. Okay, regional temperatures, we have seen Antarctic, it has warmest annual temperature on record in 2024-25. Arctic, second warmest annual temperature on record, right? Basically, Arctic is an ocean that is surrounded by landmass, and they are also effects of climate change that we observe. That is the polar amplification, polar or Arctic amplification. Okay, it is much more affected by the climate change. Then with respect to Antarctic, it was the warmest annual temperature on record. Till now, we had no such year in which Antarctic was warm to such an extent, right? Now moving forward, what are the drivers? What are the drivers of this exceptional warming? Okay, why do we have more than 1.5 degrees Celsius? For example, in 2024, we had 1.6 degrees Celsius. So what are the drivers? The number one thing is the greenhouse gases. Okay, This means that there has been continued emissions. It means that whatever nationally determined contributions were there with respect to the individual nations that have not come to a fructification. This means that they have emissions which will result into greater than 1.5 degrees Celsius rise. Okay, and there is not much that the countries are doing about it. The second thing is that there is reduced carbon dioxide uptake by natural sinks. Remember, the natural sinks of carbon dioxide can be in the form of soil-bound carbon or with respect to the forest, with respect to the biomass that contains the important carbon compounds within it, right, in the form of biomolecules. So this means that both natural sinks, whether it is soil-bound carbon or we are talking about the biomass, both of these carbons are something that is not going to be taking in more amount of carbon within them. This means that these sinks are now turning into sources because of increased amount of temperature, right? So climate change is already creating global warming. This global warming is resulting into more melting of, shrinking of cryosphere or melting of glaciers, and this is also reducing the amount of soil bound carbon, right, particularly in the tundra and the taiga regions, right? Second, ocean temperatures. Okay, there has been high amount of sea surface temperatures as well. Exceptionally high sea surface temperatures associated with El Nino and ocean variability. Okay, so these have also contributed to your exceptional warming, right? Because we know that ocean waters are the ones that will absorb more amount of heat for 1 degree Celsius rise, right? So this means that ocean temperatures, if there is increased sea surface temperatures, that will also mean that the global warming has increased by considerable significant amount, right? The third thing is atmospheric changes, that is variation in aerosols, low cloud amounts and atmospheric circulation. Okay, aerosols are basically your solid and liquid particles that are suspended within the atmosphere, right? So aerosols mainly formed like with pollutants like nitrogen oxides or sulfur dioxide. These aerosols will result into the cloud condensation nuclei. These cloud condensation nuclei are important for the water vapor to condense on these particles and therefore result into cloud formation. Okay, any variability in these kind of aerosols or with respect to the cloud formation will result into the exceptional warming, right? Now moving on, what is the impact on human health and environment? Okay, so 50%, okay, heat stress days of global land area experienced more days with strong heat stress, that is more than 32 degrees Celsius. There has been a number of days, there has been 50% heat stress days on the global land area experienced. Okay, this means that temperature increase is also going to result into various kinds of limiting factors. When we talk about limiting factors, we are talking about the plants. We are also talking about humans that are vulnerable to increased amount of temperatures, right? There is also wildfire emissions. Okay, wildfire emissions. Europe has experienced the highest annual total wildfire emissions, right? So basically what happens in global warming, because there is drying effect, because the temperatures are high, this leads to desiccation. This means that there is loss of water through the process of transpiration. Now when the loss of water is there due to transpiration, there is also increase in fuel buildup of the plants and the trees. Okay, so it is much more prone to catching fires. So this means that if there is a spark, then that will result into a huge forest fire or a wildfire, right? So these exceptional wildfires are observed in Europe, North America, Spain, Canada, and Southern California, right? Now WHO has also recognized, okay, this is very, very important with respect to heat stress days. Why it is important? Because WHO also recognizes that heat stress is the leading cause of global weather related death. When we talk about the weather related deaths, it is also one of the most important causes, right? Now moving forward, what is the path forward with respect to the urgent action that is needed? Okay. One is with respect to the current reality. That is based on current warming, the Paris Agreement's 1.5 degrees Celsius limit could be reached by the end of this decade, over a decade earlier than predicted. Okay, earlier it was predicted that maybe this 1.5 degrees Celsius is going to be breached. We understand that, and therefore there was also a push of committing to a higher amount of nationally determined contributions. Okay, because those were voluntary in nature, and any kind of violation would result into international repute being destroyed, right? So they are saying now that the decade is now shifted, that we might attain this 1.5 degrees Celsius limit, we might breach it by 2030 itself, due to this understanding of data, because the last 11 years have been the 11 most warmest year on record, because we have already got 1.6 degrees Celsius in 2024, because now even we are having 1.47 degrees Celsius in 2025. Now critical data, these type of critical data that we have Copernicus, like we have Copernicus data, it becomes very, very important because it helps the various organizations or various conference of parties to take informed decisions. Okay, informed decisions are much more important rather than just committing debates around the topics which are not committing, non-committal in nature, right? Climate insights to inform decisions, monitoring of greenhouse gases, aerosols, and atmospheric indicators, these support climate mitigation policies. Third thing is action required, right? Preparedness and prevention, they are possible only when guided with robust scientific evidence. Okay, every year and every degree counts. This means that we should not underestimate the problem that it is just a rise by 0.1 degree Celsius or 0.01 degree Celsius. Okay, 0.01 degree Celsius can also mean that you are dealing with a sea level rise that may submerge a land full of people, right? So one thing can be very, very sure, that this is a problem that is being faced by the global community, and it should not be something that should be ignored with respect to the small island developing states, right? So this is the important news with respect to the climate change. The next important thing is Ganga biodiversity recovery. Okay, we are talking about environmental pollution and degradation. Okay, and in this respect we had this Ganga recovery, Ganga biodiversity recovery. Okay, so Ganga was as we had seen, because there is Ministry of Environment and Climate Change, Ministry of Environment, Forests and Climate Change is there. So we have seen that Ganga was getting hugely polluted. That means the entire stretch of 2,525 kilometers, we have seen that due to various kinds of point as well as non-point sources, Ganga was getting polluted. Okay, because of the settlements also, because of the huge population that lives on the sides of the river banks of Ganga, there is also a number of industrial units that are dotted on the line of Ganga, right? So this means that pollution is something that is there, and pollution will directly have an effect on the aquatic biodiversity there, right? This means that aquatic biodiversity is something that gets threatened because of it, right? But recently, what has happened, that Ganga biodiversity has recovered. Okay, you would remember that we had various kinds of programs. We started with Ganga Action Plan in 1985. Okay, then Ganga Action Plan 2. Then we went forward and had finally Namami Gange program. Okay, so with respect to these, we had different kinds of strategies with respect to funding mechanism, with respect to cleaning the whole stretch, with respect to expanding the program to different types of tributaries, right? So there has been recovery because of the efforts taken. There is increase in fish species as well as ghadials. Okay, now let's look what the recovery has been like. So in 1822, the number of recorded species with respect to fish species were 271 species, right? It suffered a decline and it came down to 150 species in 1974. it further went down to 104 species. Imagine, from 271, it went down to 104 species of fishes, right? This means that pollution was, that is the pollution load in the water was continuously increasing, right? But after that, 20 nearly 20 years after that, in 2023, we have seen that 230 species of fishes are there. Okay, so this is something that is required, that is um, prepared by one of the arms of Indian Council of Agriculture Research, that is known by the name CIFRI, right? So it surveyed the entire stretch, 2,525 kilometer of Ganga mainstream, all its tributaries and the floodplain wetlands, that revealed that there has been significant amount of increase in the fish biodiversity. Right. Next, we talk about the biodiversity hotspots and cold spots. Right. So, high diversity sites, and then there are low diversity sites. It is basically drawing a comparison between the both sides. Why? Because we need to understand that where there is huge amount of biodiversity, there needs to exist a huge conservation effort also, whether it is with respect to conservation of species or whether it is with respect to the habitat appreciation, with respect to not letting the habitat degrade or fragment for the species to survive ably, right? So we have high diversity sites. So 109 in Farakka, 85 in Buxar, and 76 in Baharampur. Okay, these are the high diversity hotspots. This means that there is huge amount of biodiversity and it needs to be conserved. When we talk about low diversity, only 38 with respect to Diamond Harbour and 32 with respect to Gadkhali. Okay, we are talking about the comparison 109 versus 38, right? So definitely we need to conserve these diversity as well as the low diversity sites, because they are more on the verge of being extinct. Okay. Now that was about the fishes, that is fishes. We are now talking about ghadials. Okay, ghadials, that is a critical indicator. When we say that one of these species is a critical indicator, what do we mean? We mean that the presence of theirs in the environment, if it undergoes some kind of depreciation, then it is an indicator that the natural ecosystem has deteriorated beyond a point that is not letting these species to survive. It also means that the subsequent species, they might not be an indicator, but their population is also bound to deteriorate if these species are going to reduce in number, right? So we are talking about it being a critical indicator, right? Ghadials. So basin-wide count, over 3,000 ghadials documented across Ganges by Wildlife Institute of India. Remember that Wildlife Institute of India is the one that is going to be surveying for the population of these kind of critically endangered species, right? We have stronghold in Chambal, that is approximately 2097, approximately 2100 individuals are formed there. Then other rivers, there is much lower encounter rates in Gandak, Ghagra, Son and Ganga, right? So with respect to the tributaries, the biodiversity of ghadials is not that much. That is, their population is not something that is found a lot. But with respect to the Chambal river as well as the mainstream, you can find a long number of individuals, right? And one more thing with respect to ghadials that we should remember: one, they are critically endangered, and also they are critical indicator along with being critically endangered. Okay. Now, what are the drivers of recovery? Anyway, whenever we have the best practices, for example, in Montreal Protocol, in ozone depletion, with respect to ozone depletion, when we had a positive outcome of such kind of a protocol, we try to take out what are the best practices that have actually made it work. Okay, even with respect to the Namami Gange program, that has resulted into the biodiversity recovering with respect to gharials and fishes. What are the reasons for drivers of recovery? One is Namami Gange mission, okay, that improved the sewage treatment capacity and reduced the industrial effluents, right? The second thing was habitat restoration. Because we talk about wetland restoration, because we have Ramsar sites, we have been designating more number of Ramsar sites. There is a possibility, there is an attempt towards going towards restoration of wetlands and the wise use of wetlands, environmental flow norms and implementation, fisheries management. Okay, over 47 lakh fish juveniles have been released and they have also been tagged for monitoring how do they behave, okay, what are their stressors, what are their limiting factors, and accordingly their habitat is also being upgraded so that they are able to survive for a very long time, right? So multi-agency coordination between ICAR, State Fisheries Department and Pollution Control Boards and wildlife agencies have enabled basin-wide conservation efforts. Okay, understand this, whenever we have multiple agencies, one for biodiversity, one for pollution, one for climate change, so most of the times these agencies will work in silos. This means that they would not coordinate with each other. It will result into duplication of efforts, and it may also lead to cancellation of efforts, that one agency is lagging of effort and the other is doing right opposite of it, right? So the coordination is the thing that is very important, and that has come forward to protect the environment as well as the biodiversity in these parts, right? Now, what are the challenges? Because we have seen that there is an improvement. So what are the challenges that we face and how can these barriers be overcome? One is basin-wide restoration. Okay, that is habitat restoration should be with respect to the tributaries and floodplains beyond the current focus areas. This means that although you have covered the floodplains, you have covered the tributaries, try to go for improvising, try to increase the scaling with respect to these basin, right? Then we have address spatial disparity. Recovery concentrated in few stretches, delta, lower reaches require targeted intervention. This means that if there is disparity with respect to the regions, okay, if means that if there is decreased amount of conservation efforts, and I understand that biodiversity is something that is getting affected with respect to the low biodiversity sites and high biodiversity sites, I must have different kind of strategies for both of them, and I must address this spatial diversity. Why is there a stretch in which I have low biodiversity? Then strengthen e-flow enforcement. Implement fish passages at barrages and ensure environmental flow compliance. That means there must be right to flow, right? It should not be something that should be limited by placing barriers, okay, or impeding the flow. Then reduce anthropogenic pressures. Okay, there are various kinds of anthropogenic pressures that come in the form of sand mining, okay, especially for the cold-blooded animals, because cold-blooded animals, they do not have the thermoregulation property. This means that they need to bask in the sunlight so that they can derive the heat from the sunlight, right? And this comes at crossroads with the sand mining mafia. Okay, a lot of sand mining mafia is there that will extract the sand, and therefore these wouldn't become the places for these gharials to stay, right? So try and eliminate these kind of anthropogenic pressures. Enhance monitoring. Integrate biodiversity metrics into Namami Gange dashboards with long-term standardized monitoring. This means that it is not just the cleaning of river Ganga that is there under Namami Gange. We should also have a dashboard which includes the metrics, that is how much improvement has been done into the with respect to the important biodiversity in Ganga, right? So this was the news with respect to environmental pollution and degradation. Let us go further. So Japan's deep sea rare earth mining initiative. Okay, So Japan has recently undergone mining in the deep sea, and basically to break the dominance of rare earth elements that is cornered by China, right? So let us see what this information is about. Okay, so right now there is China's monopoly with respect to the rare earth elements. Okay, with respect to the supply of it, it dominates two-third mining share of rare earth elements. And when we talk about the refining process, so it also has a refining dominance of 90%. That is why the world is scrambling towards rare earth elements in Greenland. That is why US is focusing more on it, right? That is why Japan is also going forward with its deep sea mission, right? So Japan's deep sea mission mining initiative addresses a critical strategic vulnerability, controls two-thirds of global earth mining, China, and 90% of refined output. This means this kind of a dependence is something that is not liked by the nations, and therefore they will have missions that are going to increase the abundance of rare earth elements, one, and also increase the refining capacity. Okay, so this experimental mission uses Japan's deep sea scientific drilling vessel Chikyu, okay, to extract rare earth elements from unprecedented ocean depths, and the island's name is Minami Torishima. Minami Torishima Island. Okay, this is just an experimental phase. This is just an initiative that is taken, and it can also be seen as a first step towards breaking the dominance of China. Now, this exploration at Minami Torishima, it has yielded some kind of results. Okay, it has been seen that there are 16 million tons of total rare earth deposits that is estimated in the region. This means that this could probably lead to abundance of rare earth elements and also counter the dominance of China when it comes to rare earth elements. 730 years dysprosium reserves for electric vehicles and electronics. These reserves are very, very important for your electronic devices as well as electric vehicles, right? Yttrium supply is important for renewable energy like wind turbines, right? So these are the treasure trove beneath the waves, because we talk about the deep sea mining levels. All right, and Japan has the right to go for these kind of mining. Why? Because this is located within Japan's exclusive economic zone. Okay. Now, there are some methods of mining. Okay, of course, this mining is not without any problems for the aquatic biodiversity. That is why we talk about the environmental consequences of the developmental activities as well. Okay, so there are three extraction methods. One is the polymetallic nodules, that is collecting mineral-rich rocks from the sea floor. That means they would be located here on the ground level itself, and you are going to just extract it. That is your polymetallic nodule method of extraction. Then you have seafloor sulfide deposits, that is mining hydrothermal vent formations. That means whatever vents, hydrothermal vents are there, we are trying to extract the elements out of it. Okay, so that rare earth elements are extracted from seafloor. Then cobalt rich crust, stripping mineral layers from the underwater mountains. So you will have mountains that are there under the water, and therefore that will be extracted by such kind of machineries, right? So it is in news and it is included in the environment part, particularly because this is creating a problem, this is creating a concern with respect to marine ecosystems and the biodiversity. Okay, and also International Seabed Authority is developing global regulatory frameworks for mining international waters. This means that International Seabed Authority, it sees that to break the dominance of China, the countries are trying to go for deep sea mining, and this deep sea mining is causing a lot of concerns as far as the biodiversity is concerned, right? So what should be the rules and regulations is something that International Seabed Authority needs to ponder upon. right? Now, rare earth elements, the building blocks of modern technology, they are called the elements that are responsible for building the blocks of new technology. It is because we are talking about electric vehicles, we are talking about electronics, renewable energy, and defense systems. Okay, all of this requires, because we are talking about climate change as well. Okay, when we are talking about climate change, we are talking about the technology transfer. Okay, we are talking about renewable energy. Okay, renewable energy requires these elements, right? Solar panels, these require these elements, right? Just transition, okay, that requires these elements. Okay, even with respect to electronics or defense systems that are important for the sovereignty as well as protecting their own selves, the countries are not going to give it up, right? So this means that these rare earth elements, it is basically a fight for dominance in the international relations, right? The one who who controls the supply chains would be the one that would decide the future of power, right? So there is a continued struggle with respect to rare earth mining and the way it is being treated, even with disregard with respect to the environmental concerns, right? Now, the fourth topic with respect to grasslands. Okay, conservation of grasslands. When we talk about grasslands, it has been seen that UN has declared 2026 as the International Year of Rangelands and Pastoralists, right? The ones that go for grazing of their grazing by their cattle, right? Urgent action is needed to recognize these vital ecosystems. So let us understand what are the concerns with respect to the grasslands. Okay. First of all, what are grasslands? So grasslands are the ones that are open terrestrial ecosystems that are dominated by grasses with sparse tree cover. This means there is not much amount of trees that you will find in grasslands. Okay, much because of the reason, because the meristem of tree is different from the meristem of the grasses. This means that meristem of grasses are there at the roots, right? So even after a fire, the tree might get cleaned off, okay, but the grasses will stay because their roots are there in the soil, and from that point onwards it will start growing again, right? So these are having sparse tree covers. They are adapted to seasonal droughts, grazing, and fires. Okay, whenever we talk about biomes, we talk about the grasslands that receive less amount of moisture as compared to the tropical rainforests, right? But these grasses have adapted themselves to less amount of water. UNESCO defines them as land with less than 10% tree and shrub cover. Okay, UNESCO means that we say that it is a grassland if it has less than 10% cover of trees. Okay, but it is very, very important with respect to India. India's coverage is nearly 24%. Okay, with respect to grasslands, and less than 1% of it is protected. It is under some kind of conservation. This is a very, very big problem, because under livestock census, we will see that there are close to 550 million species, cattle species, that need these grazing grounds, and that grazing grounds are in the form of grasslands only, and therefore it becomes a problem if it is not getting conserved, right? Now, what are the critical roles of grassland? Okay, one is with respect to climate regulation. Of course, there is biomass. Of course, this biomass is going to go for photosynthesis, and therefore carbon dioxide is getting fixed into it. Therefore, climate regulation, it acts as a major carbon sink, right? It helps in mitigating climate change through soil carbon storage. We were talking about soil bound carbon, right? Soil bound carbon means that this carbon is now stored in the soil itself, not in the biomass. This means that even because once you burn the biomass, the CO2 will get released. But when it is soil bound, it means that it is going to stay there for a very, very long time, right? Then we have livelihood support. It supports the pastoral and agro-pastoral communities by providing grazing land, fodder, fuel, and food resources. So, okay, so not only for the livestock, but also for the people, they also derive their livelihood. Okay, So these cattle are known to be banks with hooves. Okay, this means that each individual or each household that owns these cattle derives a large part of their livelihood income from it. Okay, if the grasslands deteriorate, this will lead to deterioration in the health of the cattle and further deterioration with respect to these pastoral communities. Then biodiversity conservation, they serve as habitats for diverse plant species, birds and grassland dependent wildlife ecosystems. And the last thing, that water and soil regulation aid groundwater recharge, reduces soil erosion. It does so by holding on to the soil particles through its roots, and regulate local hydrology for ecosystem stability. Right? So these are the important critical roles when we talk about grasslands. Now, what are the critical gaps in conservation? The critical gaps, the number one thing is that there is misclassification crisis. Misclassification crisis means that they are still being classified as wastelands, okay, degraded forests or wastelands. This means that there is no understanding of them being a part of ecosystem as a productive ecosystem, right? It leads to inappropriate afforestation. This means that when you say that it is a degraded forest, you will go for more plantation of trees, and that will change the landscape of the grasslands. Okay, and this means that whatever species that were dependent on these grasslands, whatever animals, cattle were available that were dependent on these grasslands will also deteriorate. Institutional silos, climate action, biodiversity, land degradation, they are handled separately by UNFCCC, Convention on Biological Diversity, and United Nations Convention on combat of desertification. All right, these are treated by different conventions. This means that the work is being executed in silos. This means there is no integrated approach to a same problem, right? Forest-centric policies. Okay, we have heard about National Forest Policy 1988, right? We don't have a grassland policy. There is no national grassland policy, right? This means automatically the focus will shift from grasslands to forest itself, right? So it is essential that we have such kind of a policy to save the grasslands. Community marginalization, traditional pastoral management systems are sidelined despite proven role in sustainable grazing, right? Now, talking about strengthening grassland conservation, how do we strengthen this point? First of all, correct ecological classification, that you should not misclassify it. You should not misclassify it as wastelands or degraded forest. The second thing is dedicated legal protection, that is National Grassland Conservation Policy must be there. Just like you have National Forest Policy of 1988, you should also have Grassland Conservation Policy. Third is empower communities. It means secure tenure rights over commons, revive customary grazing practices, and legally recognize community-led stewardship models. This means that I cannot do it with a top-down approach. I must involve the local communities that are present, and they would be the ones that should contribute to the conservation of grasslands, right? Fourth is science-driven restoration. Prioritize native grass species restoration, regulate invasive plants, and avoid afforestation. That is, it should be scientifically backed. Okay, it should be evidence-backed. That we should understand that going for afforestation is just going to deteriorate what the grassland ecosystem was, right? Every time afforestation is not the solution, right? And therefore we should monitor which ones are the species that are much more important with respect to the climate. Strengthening monitoring, create national grassland inventory with standardized indicators, make environmental impact assessments mandatory for diversion. Okay, it means that even with respect to grasslands, first of all, you should not misclassify them as wastelands. Secondly, even if you are diverting it for some other use, there must be an EIA, that is environmental impact assessment, must be done for any kind of developmental activity. It is not a land that is to be diverted for any kind of developmental activity without any scrutiny, right? So this was the news with respect to grasslands. We come to the last part. NGT takes action on sewage contaminated drinking water. Okay, we are talking about the sewage water. Okay, recently there was news that some of the stretches of some states, some river stretches of some states, they were heavily polluted, and therefore NGT, which is a statutory body under the NGT rules of 2010. Okay, so this came up and they have all gone for the suo motu action, right? So NGT initiated suo motu proceedings after media reports revealed sewage contamination of drinking water across Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh and Uttar Pradesh. Okay, this means that even the drinking water was contaminated in these three states of Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh and Uttar Pradesh. These have made the NGT worried and concerned as a protector of environment. Okay, as a tribunal that is trying to go for environmental conservation, that what is happening at the in these states that can result into a problem that is a public health concern, right? Now the contamination crisis. What is the contamination crisis? Why are we talking, why have these water being polluted and has resulted into contaminating the drinking water as well? So the reasons are first, understanding with respect to which cities are being affected. So Udaipur, Jodhpur, Kota, all parts of Rajasthan, Jaipur, Ajmer. Then with respect to UP, Greater Noida, Bhopal and Indore, these are the major urban centers that are affected. What is the root cause? The root cause is decades old corroded pipelines with drinking water lines passing through open sewage drains, right? Understand this, whatever water we drink, it has to pass through some kind of pipelines, right? But over a period of time, these will have some kind of solids dissolved within it, and these will result into the metal pipelines getting corroded. Okay, it is not possible to change them all the time, but it has been decades old since these pipelines have been there, and they have corroded to the extent that it is also contaminating the drinking water, right? What is the health impact? The health impact is vomiting, diarrhea in Greater Noida, and E. coli that is detected in Bhopal and has led to at least 6 deaths in Indore. Okay. So what is the legal framework and NGT's mandate? Just to understand, because this is important with respect to our exam. One thing is, where does this whole NGT mandate derive its statutory status from? What was the rationale within the constitution that we came up with this NGT? Okay, there is constitutional rights, that is Article 21, that is right to life will include right to safe drinking water as well, right? Both of them will be included. And Article 243W, that is urban local bodies are responsible for water supply and sanitation, right? This describes the mandate that you whenever there is a problem with respect to drinking water or water supply with respect to agriculture also, then it is the urban local bodies under 243W that will be held responsible. Okay, now environmental laws are also violated. Okay, when we talk about the contamination of drinking water, it is not just under Article 21 that it becomes a problem. It is also a problem with respect to Environmental Protection Act. It includes both your Air Act as well as Water Act. Okay, and CPCB, that is Central Pollution Control Board, is the mandate that requires to clean up. Okay, that is the one that will require these things to take place. Then Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act, that is 1974. What is NGT's suo motu power? The tribunal can act independently on credible information, including news reports where environmental harm is alleged. And that is the reason that they have gone for this suo motu investigation into this part. What are the guiding principles that these operate upon? One is polluter pays principle. Polluter pays principle says that the one who is creating pollution, whether of soil, water or air, is the one who should pay for the cleanup as well, right? Then there is precautionary principle. What do you mean by precautionary principle? It means that even if it is uncertain that a particular, or if there is an evidence that certain kind of contaminant can create problems in the environment, then also precautions must be taken place. Okay, just because there is uncertainty, it does not lead to overdoing of things, right? Third is sustainable development, that it should be on the overlap of social as well as economical as well as environmental domains, right? Now the next thing is, when we are talking about the systemic failures and accountability, why has this happened? First is infrastructure collapse, right? Because the pipelines have gotten old and decades old, and there is no infusion of new infrastructure, right? So aging pipelines, severe corrosion, poor maintenance, and lack of asset management. That is, the life cycle of these infrastructure is not something that is assessed regularly. Second, governance gap, that is inadequate surveillance, delayed repairs, weak ULB accountability, and fragmented center-state ULB coordination. That is, it is also a blame factor with respect to the governance part of it. Okay, that means that there was not enough surveillance done. Okay, even when there were problems with respect to the damaged pipelines, there were delayed repairs, and that has led to more amount of corrosion. Okay, accountability and coordination is also something that is missing. It is a public health emergency because it will result into diseases due to the water being contaminated by E. coli. Okay, E. coli, that E. coli presence indicates that there is fecal matter that is present in the water. Okay, and that is something that millions of people are being exposed to. Regulatory non-compliance, that is failure to prevent sewage ingress, unsafe distribution systems, and CPCB and SPCB, the oversight is inadequate. They are the ones that are responsible for controlling abatement of pollution, right? Now, what is the way forward? The way forward is immediate to long-term solutions. Immediate actions would be emergency disinfection. That is, you cannot allow for this to continue for a very, very long time. Otherwise, it will result into a huge public health outcry, right? Alternate safe water supply should be there. Health camps for the affected populations, right? This means that there must be separate camps, or you should also supply for safe water. Short term would be audit and replace corroded pipelines. Okay, this is a short term measure. Ensure physical separation from sewers and ward level testing with public dashboards. Medium term would be asset management plans, leak detection systems. Okay, wherever you find that such kind of contaminants are leaking, you should try and detect them and then plug them, right? This is your medium term reform. Pressure management, strengthen SPCs and ULBs with funds and technical capacity. The last is regulatory enforcement, that is enforce the Water Act standards, okay, both in principles as well as in words. Penalties for non-compliance, institutionalize NGT directions into municipal SOPs, right? So these become your immediate to long-term solutions, right? So with this, we come to an end of this current affair class. Thank you so much.